All right. Well, welcome everybody to Q Plus EDU. Thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on transitioning at work. My name is Frederick. I am Out Youth Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator. My pronouns are they, them, and I am just here for tech support today. So I'm going to turn my video off just a minute. I'm going to turn it over to Rin Gonzalez, Out Youth's Operations and Programs Director, and they will be moderating our conversation today. Take it away.
Thank you, Frederick, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our session on transitioning at work. It's actually one of the questions I get most often from our youth who are about to make the transition into adulthood, how to come out at work or transition on the job. I am joined today by several esteemed panelists who I have had the pleasure of meeting before, except Jay. Hi, Jay. It's nice to meet you. We'll learn more about you in a second. We are going to go around. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. That's a tradition here at Out Youth, where we go around and say our name, our age, our pronouns, and we're going to add in where you're from, how you identify within the LGBTQIA+ community, and a physical description of yourself for blind or visually impaired attendees or folks who are joining us via phone. I know that's a lot of things. I can remind you as we go, and because it is my prerogative, I'm going to go in alphabetical order, starting with Anna.
Okay, my name is Anna Nguyen. My pronouns she, L, E. Let's see, I am a Vietnamese American transgender woman. I am 20 years old and many months. Actually, I am 61 years old. Let's see, what do I look like? I'm a slightly built, non-Asian looking Asian person with blunt bangs, graying hair, and today I have on a pride color off-shoulder top.
Did you make that yourself, Anna?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, Anna is a well-renowned seamstress and fashion designer here in Austin.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Did I forget anything?
Nope, you did not forget anything.
Cool.
We'll move on to Jay. I see over here repeating the alphabet to myself. So I went in order. Hi, Jay.
So had to figure out where I lay in the alphabet. So I'm glad we're all on the same page here. I'm Jay Gray. I use they, them, their pronouns. I am 29 years old. I identify as transgender fluid and queer. I'm missing something before.
Physical description of yourself.
I'm a very pale person with fair skin. I have light purple hair that is swept back, and I have purple eyebrows.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jay. Liam.
Thanks. Yeah, so my name is Liam Garcia, pronouns he, him. I am 34 years old when I remember correctly. Sometimes I feel like I'm 40, it depends. Where I'm from, so I was actually born in Mexico, brought here when I was 2, but aside from where I'm from, I think I'm mostly Texan more than anything else. How I identify, so I do identify as a transgender man who is queer. Sexuality is all over the place. I think most days it's queer, right? I think that's about where it lands. And my physical description, so I'd say I'm semi-muscular build Hispanic man with short hair, beard, kind of starting to still work on the mustache. But yeah, that's, I think, pretty typical there. Kind of boring, but I do have a flowery shirt on, so we're good.
Thank you, Liam. Reed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reed Womack. I use they, them, their pronouns. I'm 26. I am originally from a really small town in West Texas and moved to Austin, so just a Texan as well. I identify as a non-binary queer butch, and my physical description is slim white person with brown hair, also swept back similarly to Jay's, with glasses, a septum piercing, and a multicolored wild pattern shirt.
It's a really cool shirt.
Thanks, Reed. And myself, my name is Rin Gonzalez. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm 36 and I was born and raised in Texas. So as much as our legislature tries to tell me that they don't want me here, too bad. This is my state too. I started jokingly identifying and now I think openly identifying. I just came from therapy where my therapist also asked me how I was identifying. And I think right now I am definitely identifying as gender in this economy. As far as a physical description of myself, I am a slimish white person, sometimes translucent, depends on what time of year it is. Bald, brown glasses, and I am wearing a peach shirt today with a tan jacket over it that the preteens in Preteen Dropping It Out Youth complimented me on, saying I looked very dapper today. It's like, oh, thanks, kids. Keep you around. So we're going to dive into questions about what it is like to transition at work, beginning with the question, tell us about your transition, in particular, how things went with your employer. I also want to acknowledge that many folks on the panel may have transitioned years ago, or may still be in a transition, or like me, I don't know how many times, I've worked at Out Youth for 16 years, y'all. I don't know how many times I have transitioned on the job. I've changed my email address here, I don't know, probably once or twice a year for 16 years. So transition is a process. And we are going to go in a backwards alphabetical order, this time starting with Reed.
All right. Yeah, so my transition at work has been interesting because it's still ongoing, but also I have worked at my current place since I was a student worker. So I've been there for 8 years. So when I started working there, I identified as a straight woman. And then quickly after I got my full-time position there, I identified as a queer woman. And then within a year, I identified as a non-binary queer person. So they've kind of seen me through a bunch of different phases. Not phases, stages, I would say. It's always been growth and always been me. But yeah, it's been really interesting. I was just reflecting on it and I was thinking about coming out as a queer person versus coming out as a non-binary person, and how the first time I came out, it was very like quick, easy acceptance, celebratory. You know, there were already other queer people working there. It was very old hat. Everyone was super chill with it. And then once I came out as non-binary, it was a little like, oh, wait, okay, we need to learn some things now. And it was a little bit more of a shift, I think, for everyone. But I've been very lucky in that I work in a place where people are usually trying to continue to educate themselves. I should mention that I'm a librarian at a college. So people are always learning, always trying to, you know, keep best practices in mind and stuff like that. So they have been very open to learning and stuff. It's been a process and it's continuing to be a process, but it's been going pretty good. And I haven't had any macro aggressions. That's been good.
Always great to not have the macro aggressions, though. If we can also figure out how to limit the microaggressions, work on that too. Liam, tell us about your transition and how it went with your employer.
Yeah, so I started my transition 7 years ago. So back to what I do. So I am in tech. At that time, I was working at a startup here in Austin. Was identifying openly as a lesbian since I was 15, so it was a known thing. You know, as it tends to happen, we find out and discover things about ourselves, and it finally felt in a safe space enough to start coming out and making the transition, the physical transition. And what I ended up doing is I talked to my HR department beforehand. I let them know, hey, this is something that's happening. I'm not starting tomorrow, but I do need you to know that over the course of the next year, I am going to be undergoing like physical changes as well as vocal changes and all of that. And, you know, there will be a point where, you know, we'll have to change my name. Thankfully, HR was really helpful. They were really hungry for information, so they kept asking me and proactively trying to get information from HRC and various resources to understand how to support me and how to support the teams around me also. I was in a very front-facing role, client-facing role. In fact, there's a whole bunch of like training videos currently still for that startup's knowledge base featuring me and my old self. Um, and you know, I have to say that was probably the thing that I was the most concerned about was how the clients would receive that information. Thankfully, HR was really good about allowing me to say when I was ready to have like the sales team or tech support start using a different pronoun or start using a different name. And because I was mostly on the phone and on video, it really just came down to when I felt comfortable passing. And so they very much let me be the one in control to say, okay, now I will be known as Liam. And essentially what we did is I took a week PTO. When I came back, everything was set up and ready for me. So I think I really lucked out in the fact that, I think similar to Reed, I was in a place that was very hungry for that kind of information and that kind of training and very supportive. I'd have to say the most difficult part of it, honestly, was at the time, my direct supervisor was not someone that I felt was uh, very supportive in or very aware of any of these issues. He was very misogynistic, patronizing, especially to other female employees. So this was a situation where I did feel some resistance to just being out and open and being myself. And I dealt with it in the same way. I was like, I have nothing to tell you. I am doing what I do. I am now Liam, and that's just what you have to deal with. And he kept trying to probe me and ask me stuff. I was like, I don't have to talk to you about anything that I don't feel comfortable talking about. If you have any questions, you can go to HR, right? It just kind of very much laid those hard rules. Thankfully, even clients responded really well. I have a very high-profile Christian, very vocal Christian clients at the time, and even they were really supportive, which was really surprising. So I have to say I got pretty lucky. And specifying those limits and coming prepared to HR was a big part of the success at that time.
Thanks, Liam. It's very important to point out the role of HR and making sure that the people in those roles are able to fully embrace and help everyone in the organization make those changes. I feel lucky to be at Out Youth where that is easy also because I am HR. So you tell me your name needs to change. Okay, cool. Jay, I know where you work, and I'm curious how that works because everyone else on the call, I've of course met before, they've all been involved in Out Youth in one way or another. I'm really curious to know what transition at work has been like for you.
Yes, I've just been fanboying over Out Youth from afar, so it's nice to get to be part of this. So I work at Catchafire right now, which is a volunteer platform, and before that, I spent a decade in the nonprofit sector, and I have had an external or high-profile role for quite a while now, either with board members or donors or at my current role, I do a lot of public speaking. And I have gone through a couple of different transitions. Before Catchafire, I would say the experiences were pretty antagonistic. I was actively misgendered to the point where the board chair would misgender me intentionally in front of donors or board members or at events. And I'll be honest, at some point, I just realized that wasn't the space for me and I left. You did mention something about HR, and I will say that the organizations that I had these issues at did not have any kind of HR. So, it can be a really important detail to ask, especially when you're interviewing, if there is human resources or what kind of support there is for staff for different kinds of conflicts or issues that may arise. That was a good life lesson for me. But at Catchafire, I actually changed my name legally. And I'm still finishing up the process of updating everything in my life with this, with my current name. But I have to say, surprisingly, it was more simple than I thought it would be for the audience members for all of our webinars and for people that would email me and reach out to me. It was pretty easy to educate them on that. I would say the pronouns is still sometimes something that confuses people or I get some pushback on, but I kind of expect that in pretty much any part of my life at this point. But I will say specifically internally, they're quite willing to learn, which I do really appreciate. Sometimes it's a lot of education, but you know, I do appreciate that there doesn't ever feel like an active moment where they're trying to harm me or retaliate or say something that is actively going to hurt me. It always feels like they're coming from a place of good intent. So.
What a difference that can make to just have people not be actively shitty to you. And I can say that on the webinar, I've decided. And it is very strange to have worked in this sector as long as I have, because I definitely remember the days where you didn't want to work at a place that had HR because they were going to make everything worse. So that's just a reminder to everyone watching now and anyone who might be watching this on YouTube later that the world is constantly changing. So the advice that you're getting today is great, and take it with the grain of salt though, that if you're watching this 10 years from now, hi, 2031, weird. I wish I hadn't done that math out loud. Ugh. HR might not be a good thing. So thanks for sharing that experience, Jay. I know that that was hard, and I'm so glad that it's become surprising at how easy some of it is, with the usual caveat that changing one's name, all of the places that you have to oh my God. Anna, I'd love to hear about your experience, which for as long as I've known you, I'm surprised that I don't know that part of your story.
Well, it's a great story. You're gonna love it. It's a two-part story with slightly different morale to them. So I have been up to, or rather, well, I've worked in 3 different places since I transitioned 8 years ago. I came out to my wife in 2013 on Labor Day of 2013, and just a kind of fun tidbit. I came out to her on the anniversary of our, let's see, our first date was in 1983. I came out to her in 2013. So yeah, on the 30th anniversary of our first date. I didn't plan it that way. It just worked out that way. So I came out to her on Labor Day 2013, and Halloween of 2013, I was still presenting mail at work at the time. The company that I was at had a Halloween costume contest. And as Rin mentioned earlier, sewing is a bit of my forte, so I decided to make myself a Pan Am stewardess costume. Well, I call it stewardess as opposed to flight attendant, because back in the days, we were stewardesses. So I made myself a costume complete with a cap and a flight bag and gloves and everything, and wore that to work. And everybody was just bowled over, as you can imagine. And I won the costume contest by popular vote by a landslide. So the year following that, on July 4th, over the July 4th weekend, was when I came out at work. And the Pan Am stewardess caper was I completely planned that as a way to foreshadow to people who I actually am. So when I came out over July 4th weekend, the following year, I don't think that there was much, people were surprised, but not shocked, should I say. So I went to my manager. I was at a medium-sized startup, I would say. We had about 250 people at that time. I went to my manager and his boss, who's the VP of engineering, and his boss, who's the CEO. I've worked with all of these people at a previous company, but even if I didn't, I think it would have been a good idea to go all the way up the chain as far as you can. Number one, because they will be the one that will determine how your coming out will go. I've worked with all these people before, and I have a pretty good idea of how they will react. So I sent an email to all of them, plus the HR person, plus the corporate counsel, i.e. the company lawyer, and basically told them the story that, well, the first line of the email was, I'm going to change my name to Anna Nguyen. And then I go through and describe my journey with gender and how I arrived at where I'm at, how stable my home life remained, and how it would not affect the company's operation in any way. So following that email, we had a sit down, all of us, and we basically discussed a plan on bringing the news to the company. We agreed that in the same way that we generally don't announce somebody's wedding or marriage to the whole company, we won't announce my coming out. But what we did was to for the CEO to tell his direct report that this is happening, and his direct report being the vice presidents, they will tell the managers, and the managers will tell their people, so everybody will know, but there is no company-wide email announcement email. So I took so they sent, so we had that meeting about a week before July 4th, and then over the week of July 4th, I took a week off. And during that time, as per custom, we have our weekly meetings, and so the news travel through the groups. So by the time I came back from that week of vacation, I came back as Anna. And the first day I held kind of a lunch and learn thing where people can come, I can tell them my story personally, and they can ask any questions they wanted to. And that went really great. One of the questions was from a guy who's a bit of a wise guy. He said, I only have one question. Did you make the dress you're wearing today? So, but other than that, it went really great. In fact, the director of IT, we worked with the IT people right after my coming out email to make sure that my new email address was in place when I came back. So going forward from that, it was really great, actually. The people that I was a little bit concerned about, for example, the director of IT, an ex-army type, always very businesslike and very gruff and very macho man. I was a little bit concerned about him, but he was actually the completely professional, and it was as if nothing has changed. Our relationship didn't change, and everything was just as it was before, which was, I suppose, was really the best that I could have hoped for. So that's my, so the morale of that story is that enlist allies beforehand, and make sure the allies are as high up as you can make them. because they are the one who will dictate the direction of your coming out, and they will be your advocates and supporters. Now, my second coming out, okay, so I said I worked at 3 places. After I left that company, I worked a few years in fashion. Again, there was no coming out because I don't know if anybody knew that I am transgender, but it was never an issue, as you can imagine, being in the fashion industry. After that, I came back into IBM, and that's where I am now. And I did not have a formal coming out. I didn't tell anybody directly that I'm transgender until very recently. I kind of dropped hints along the way. I have a little transgender pride heart emoji on my Slack avatar, for example. And my big quote unquote coming out event was that I organized a company-wide presentation called Transgender 101. Everything you've always wanted to know about being transgender, but were afraid to ask. So it was company-wide, and as you can imagine, IBM being a company of 400,000 people, it was my coming out. And many hundreds of people attend from dozens of countries all over the world. And it was really well received. We got really great feedback from pretty high up. So I think upon that was my coming out. Again, not directly, kind of obliquely. And I guess the morale here, the moral of this story is that I feel that being transgender shouldn't be any different than being cisgender or being non-binary or gender fluid or whatever else, i.e. cisgender, non-fluid people don't go around telling other people that they're cisgender. So by the same token, transgender people and non-binary people don't need to do that neither. So that's why I never did that explicitly. But the Transgender 101 served 2 purposes. Number 1, obviously to educate and inform. And number 2, well, to kind of for me to come out. And I think I've carried on long enough.
So 2 things. That Pan Am stewardess costume outfit thing is one of the most fabulous pieces of design I have ever seen before. I did have the pleasure of seeing it in person pre-pandemic, and it is spot on, y'all. It's like, it's almost like Anna snuck into Pan Am and stole the record, stole the actual designs. It's
pictures.
Yeah, oh, don't worry. We'll figure that out, how to share that with all the panelists later. The other thing that I love about your story, Anna, is it points out that coming out is not a one and done thing. That's something that I often find when I do presentations, that there's this assumption among cisgender and heterosexual people that, you come out once and you don't really have to ever do it again. And that's simply not true. And the thing that we try to impart to our youth is that the more practice that they can get at a younger age, that perhaps that might be easier at an older age. Plus this piece about they shouldn't have to come out in the first place.
Yeah. May I make
Please
a comment?
do. That's the best part of the panel. It's when we all riff off of each other.
So you hit a really good point on like, no, we don't absolutely have to come out every time, right? Since I've transitioned, since I first started my transition, I've worked now at 4 different places. And I'll say, like, at first I was very much, I want to go stealth. It doesn't matter. I want to just fly under the radar. No one has to know. It's not that big of a deal. And I found that for me, I felt like I was hiding a part of myself or hiding a part of my experiences when I'd be hanging out with new coworkers at happy hour or just icebreakers, right? And telling stories is so much harder when you're trying to talk about your recent past self um, versus who you are now. So I definitely found myself doing the same thing that Anna was saying. It's like I ended up coming out at every single place I worked. I ended up coming out as that. What I found is that I went from being super nervous about it the first time I went to a new job and wondering, well, how are these people going to take it and how do I do it, to kind of taking the David at Schitt's Creek approach now, where it's like, yeah, of course of course I'm trans. Like, why would you think I'm not, right? Or like, why does that matter? And just kind of making it very matter of fact. And I think the more we continue to have these conversations with each other, and the more of us that keep coming out at jobs, the easier it is to just kind of take that, nonchalant, yes, I happen to also be trans, almost in that similar way of like, yeah, I'm Mexican, and right, like you can kind of tell. Yeah, I found that to be a very interesting part, and see that very much a part of my continuing career. It's just another part of you, another face of you, another aspect to your personality that will come out when it needs to come out, or if you think that it should.
So one of the things I'm curious about, the stories that we've heard today are generally positive. But I do invite you to think back, because one of the things that we get asked a lot at OutYouth is from employers is, how can we do it better? What are we missing? What are the things we're not thinking of? And that can be something very simple. I did not realize, for example, that when we start interviews for a job at OutYouth, we always introduce ourselves first with our name, our pronouns, and our job title, because that's just the way that we do business. And so we start every staff meeting, and we ask the person how they identify, what name they would like to go by and what their pronouns are. That lesson was learned in a very difficult way by me very early on, when I interviewed an intern who showed up for an interview one way and bombed the interview, y'all. I have never been in an interview that was that painful, and it was just for an internship. And then got an email from them later that day and said, actually, is it okay if I do that again? You see, I'm trans, and I showed up not the way that I actually identify, and so I was like, yeah, totally, come back, let's try this again. Best intern interview ever, because they were able to show up as they were, as they knew themselves to be. So we've incorporated that. So given that, I'm curious, what is that thing, no matter how small or how big? And I'm going to start, well, actually, I will let somebody raise their hand, because I can see that Liam is pondering, and I was going to call on him first, but he doesn't look ready. So Anna.
I think it's important to not just suddenly drop a bombshell without any warning. And this advice goes for coming out at work, as well as many other things, many revealing big news. I think generally people would react, if not better, then maybe at least less surprised or shocked if they have some kind of foreshadowing of what's coming down the pike. I'm really a big proponent of dropping hints, whether it's in coming out at work or in transitioning or anything. Give people a clue, and also in signaling that one is an ally to the LGBTQIA+ community. I mean, maybe it would have worked okay if one just comes out and say it, but I think hints and advance warning probably work a lot better.
Yeah, humans don't like surprises, and that's not a bad thing. Liam, you don't get to make that face just because we are romantically involved. Just because I like to make grand pronouncements. Yeah, so let that be your lesson today, everyone. It's supposed to be a panel about work. But it's true. We find that especially with our youth who are transitioning at home, they've come to know who they are and they want to go home after their first time at Out Youth, where they've come in that first day saying, at home, I'm identifying as maybe bisexual. And they finish their first night at Out Youth and they're like, I'm a queer, polyamorous, trans mask boy. And I'm going to go home and tell my parents. I'm like, might want to reel that back a little bit. Like, let's continue having conversations. You get to identify however you want. And that's huge. Like, let's make sure that you are safe first. That's the core of what Anna's encouraging all of us to do. Plan for our own safety. Anyone else have something that a place of work could have done better or a future place could do better? Liam?
Yeah, I'd have to say, like, as far as what they could have done better, I actually think my employers so far have done a great job. What I think would have been great is if they had dealt with a lot of these things before me, if they had gotten some education before I joined on, right? So it's one of those situations where, because I was the first one at most of these that either was transitioning actively or, decided to be out about my transition, regardless of whether there were other people that were trans or not, it meant that I had to deal with a lot of the questions. A lot of the, well, which restroom do you use? And, if, for example, at one place we ended up having to remodel the restrooms because they needed to be remodeled. But the question became, it's like, well, do we want unisex restrooms? And all of a sudden, everyone came to me, CEO, HR, everybody. It's like, Liam, what do you think from a trans perspective? And then all of a sudden, I became the spokesperson for all trans, non-binary, and like, that's a little too much pressure sometimes, right? So I'd say, like, what would have been helpful from an employer standpoint is for them to have done the research before I got there, to have been to be proactive in dealing with a lot of these different questions around gender, sexuality 101, and in general making a workplace more equitable across the board. So I do think that would have been easier from an employee standpoint.
And it's important to point out that this was very different 20 years ago. 20 years ago, resources did not exist. Now we have the internet. Like, you can just Google, how do I make my workplace better for trans people? And PDFs will show up. It's magic. So do encourage everyone to give it a goog, as the youth say. Reed or Jay, you want to rock, paper, scissors for it? You also don't have to answer if you don't have, that's also okay.
I was just going to echo kind of what Liam said about wanting employers to be a little bit more proactive. My colleagues and coworkers and employers were all very eager to learn, but it was also me that had to advocate for them setting up trainings so I wouldn't get misgendered. And so it was a willingness to learn, but also not the first step to actually do their research and either bring someone in or get the resources for us. So I think proactive is a very good word choice, Liam, and that's really what I would have enjoyed more.
It almost reminds me of that phrase that we've been using a lot lately, which is allyship is a verb, right? It means action. So it's not just, oh yeah, I want to know about that. It's more of having done the work already and done the research and not taxing the people who are already going through this process themselves with the emotional weight of having to also train or teach other people about it. So
ironically, the workplace I have has a program that you can take like 3 trainings of, and then you get a little ally as a verb certificate that you get to display on your desk. And it was really fun to point that out to the people who were not actively being an ally, to be like, hey, you should retake that training and or take it off your desk because something's happening.
I love the thought of Reed just like going by and like, nope, that's mine. Do it again.
Just put like a
Your
red
ally
stamp
card is
sticker on it.
revoked.
It's like time for a retest. Yeah.
Jay.
Yeah, I would definitely say not relying on the emotional labor of the marginalized people at your workplace would be fantastic. My example would be I am really excited to say I'm currently pursuing facial masculinization. However, I had dealt with a lot of issues with my insurance company, and I had thought to just ask our people team, and they very naively believed the insurance company when they said they cover all care that's affirmative for transgender people, which I know for a fact. Like I didn't need to Google it to know that that is not true. Um, and instead, it became me creating like a whole resource for the company so that people knew what is and isn't covered. But that would be a good example of a thing that they could have done themselves or researched. And the other thing I would just say is just changing your mindset that cis hetero isn't the default of people would go a really long way for other people at your organization. And, you know, that is for the trans and queer people there, but there could also be people that discover that they are actually queer or trans later in life. And the more you change the way you view humans and what you think of as normal, the more comfortable and the more safe your environment will be for others.
I love that. That's something that I teach about a lot in my trainings is, well, it's twofold. It depends on what kind of audience it is. When there's that person in the back, when I like go through the gender identities, and you can tell, you know, the look. It's the look that says, how many gender identities are there? That's when I point them out and I say, every time somebody makes that face, we add 4 more. So stop it. But then I also do a trick question of the entire audience of how many gender identities are there? And currently there's about 7 billion because everyone is different. Everyone's concept and experience of gender is going to be different depending on the time, place, family they grew up in, environment, age, all of those things. Everyone is different. And so yes, this holistic approach and understanding is key, and it makes life so much easier. In the same vein, we did get a question from the audience. So the last question, I will say, was more directed at what a company could do. So treating a company as an entity, which we generally don't like to do post Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. What do you wish ally coworkers would do to make the workplace better? So this is, if you could tell one ally one thing that they could do to make the workplace better, what would that be?
Well, I'd bring it back to being proactive about education. But I don't know if maybe this is just my preference, right? And obviously open to the panel here, but you know, I've had a lot of friends at each of the various places that I've worked at, where you know I come out to them first, or they already know, and they're able to support me if needed, right? But one of the things that I always have a discussion with them about is, you know, if people come up to you asking about these things, don't be afraid to point them to me, right? Like, you don't have to make assumptions or speak for me. Encourage people to walk up to me and ask me, because I don't want it to be something that's whispered about behind me. The best way to often address difficult questions around things like, oh, well, does Liam now go to the men's bathroom or what's up, right? Come out and ask me, right? And we can talk about it, which means that as an employee and as the person who's transitioning, you should be emotionally prepared to handle a lot of the difficult questions that do come. I remember one situation where I had a customer support agent who, you know, worked at a completely different department than I did, but always made it a point to walk. Whenever he walked by me, he would make that comment of, well, if I identified as a dinosaur tomorrow, would I just be a dinosaur? And would just make all these random comments. And, you know, it's one of those, like, he's a friend of a friend. And it just came to a point where, like, they brought him in and we all just sat down and we had the conversation. It's like, we get it that you disagree, but this behavior is passive aggressive, and if it doesn't stop, I will be going to HR, right? We get it. You have your differences. That needs to stop. So at that point, it was really helpful to have the allies to help connect the conversation, but not necessarily have to go and do it for me. I found it to be very empowering. I think it's important to be able to speak up for ourselves. And again, to not have that chatter happen behind closed doors or behind us. I think being actively involved in it really helps demystify and kind of not make trans people as scary or as other. I think it really helps as far as like workplace communication in general, and helps you focus on your job at the end of the day, right? You can just deal with it where it needs to happen, and you can go on and actually do your job after that. So yeah, that'd be a little bit of what I'd say about coworkers.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Liam. And to clarify, no, that would not make him a dinosaur, but I believe myself, along with the other panelists, can think of another D word or several that might make him. It looks like Anna has something to add.
Well, yeah, I mean, he can be a dinosaur if he wants to. He can knock himself out. What I have to say is kind of tangential to what Liam just said. Sometimes I wish my co-workers would be more, would feel freer to ask me questions, especially at IBM, because IBM is a super progressive and inclusive company. You would be amazed. However, it's also a huge company, and as such, people are really kind of like go overboard as far as doing the right thing and being completely business-like is concerned. And as such, people have never asked me anything about my being transgender, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe not, I don't know. But I would just feel like, and it's tough for them too, right? How do they ask the questions without seeming ignorant or insensitive or too prying? On the other hand, they seem to be like making really conscious effort to steer away from the subject. I mean, we talk about everything else in our personal lives, just not me being transgender. So I think maybe being a bit more relaxed and informal about that. And I think some of that is on me as well, that maybe I haven't dropped enough hints that I would be okay with if the conversation went that way. But I think when people kind of just tiptoe around the subject, that could be, well, I wouldn't say it's damaging, but it's probably, it's pretty uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, it kind of turns it into the elephant in the room when you're like, it's not an elephant. it's
My name is Liam.
Yeah, exactly.
And talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one likes to be the open secret.
Similar to what Liam and Adam were saying, I find the thing that has made at least my current role a bit more comfortable than others in the past is that my coworkers have checked in with me. So especially if someone's misgendered me or said something insensitive and I didn't say anything back, for example, they would check in and ask me like, hey, in the future, do you want me to say something? Is this like a type of situation where you don't really want to make it a thing? And for me, that felt like tangible support. Even simply asking like, what does support look like to you is a really solid way for you to open the door. You can always Google things like that, but it is very personal for each human, like what support's going to look like for that specific trans person. And to me, that feels like they're really putting in some kind of effort and not making it weird, which I feel like really captures a bit of what Anna was saying. You know, it doesn't have to be a taboo topic. I'm fine with the fact that I'm trans. Like, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. It's everyone else's big deal. I'm glad that got.
It reminded me of a comedian that has a stutter, and part of his punchline is like, "What? I have a stutter? Like, how bad is it?" Right? And it's like I show up, it's like, "I'm trans? Like, what? Like, how bad is it? Can everybody tell?" Right? It's like, no, we're aware. We know. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of echo what Jay said about just like having coworkers ask for support. And something that I think that really helped me was that I had coworkers from the beginning who talked to me about how I wanted things to be dealt with when I wasn't in the room, because that's often when misgendering happens. And having the knowledge that there's a coworker in most of the meetings that are going on in my building, where there's at least one person who, if I get misgendered, will speak up and say, "Oh, hey, that's not their pronouns," or like, "You messed up on this," and like knowing that someone is there when I'm not there to represent myself and remind people if they need that has been really helpful and really alleviates stress for me, because then I know that I'm not going to have to immediately see those people after they've been misgendering me for an hour together or something.
Yeah, allyship takes all sorts of forms. And one of my favorite things that I heard from an alum of OutYouth who has since entered the workplace, they're allies in the workplace now. Every time someone misgenders them, they go, "Who are you talking about?" And they just get confused until the person like uses the correct pronoun. Like negative, is that positive? Negative reinforcement. I don't know. I guess if you throw chocolate at them after they get it right, whatever. So I want to point out two things I neglected to mention. So speaking of allyship, both as an individual and in the workplace, one of the things that OutYouth has done through the Texas GSA Network, thank you, Frederick, for all of your hard work, we have launched an online training program for all adult staff in K through 12 schools called Be a Beacon. You can find out more information about Be a Beacon and enroll at beabeacon.lgbt. What a time we live in, right? .lgbt is a thing now, also .gay. .trans, not yet, we're working on it. From there, teachers and school staff can take those trainings, and at each level they get a different kind of certification as well as a gift to show their commitment to embracing not only LGBTQIA+ students, but also their fellow staff and colleagues. The other thing, and this leads us into the last question I want to ask today, because it is the most hairy. In fact, again, it came up in therapy again today, so might as well turn therapy into a professional conversation too, right? That's not a weird boundary thing. I wrote a book called Trans Plus: Love, Sex, Romance, and Being You. One of the chapters near the very end is all about work and what it is like to transition at work and what kind of things workplaces can do, as well as what trans folks need to be prepared for, trans and non-binary youth, as they enter the workforce. There's also a section about changing one's name, including a handy reference that I think I'm going to snap a picture of and send to Jay. It's called "Oh, All the Places You'll Go, parentheses, to change your name." Y'all. My favorites, if we crowdsource submissions, the weirdest place you have to change your name: on your ham radio operator's license. Would not have thought of that one, right? But trans women very much into ham radio. Multiple submissions for that one. So one of the things that I am coming up against as somebody who continues to transition is, I've got one name on this book. I'm about to write another book, and I've got a series in the hopper that I want to write too. What name is going to be on all of these books, and how do they all connect? And it's something that I've had conversations with engineers about who are trans, who have patents in their name and want to make sure that all of that tracks through. Jay, this may be a question especially for you because you are going through that process right now. Can you speak to the pros and cons of changing your name and what challenges that might come with that regarding professional credentialing, public recognition, published writing or speaking. So this whole idea of we all have a personal brand that is in some ways very official. They have papers and documents that come with that. How does one handle that? And it's also okay if the answer is, I haven't figured it out yet.
It's been pretty challenging. I have not gone by my birth name for about 10 years now. However, I did go by a different name than I currently do still. So it's just, my brand is chaos, if you will. I own it and I love it, but it is challenging. I do have a lot of things in my portfolio that are strictly related to previous names that just aren't me. I have kind of let them stay with the old names, mainly because I have the privilege of being out very openly. And I've felt pretty strongly that it's fine that it's on like a document I've made or some like video I was speaking on or something like that, as long as the people in the current times are not calling me that name, unless obviously they don't know. I would say the challenging part for name changes is truly all the different places you have to think about it and then educating others. I am actually tracking how much money and time it takes to change my name. And I have legally changed it, but I'm still updating like my bank accounts, for example. You would think that that would have been done by now, but you know, they love to throw some fun surprises like it. It actually led me to make a transition plan guide for my office because I realized that other people don't have a real concept of what changing your full name legally is like, because you know, a lot of cishet people, they understand changing a last name, right? But that's a very different process, unfortunately. And it can be really difficult as a professional to figure out where you are comfortable keeping an old name or if you aren't at all. And that's going to impact how you're going to proceed with things. But if you don't have the support of wherever you're at currently, it's going to be very difficult for you to even address your past and those older documents or publications you have. So, I mean, there's definitely pros and cons. It takes energy and time and a significant amount of money, quite honestly. But the thing that sold me on changing my name, frankly, was I was tired of doctors calling me by a name that wasn't mine. And I didn't want to turn 30 with a name that's not me. So obviously everyone's different, but I think you've got to look at the pros and cons, and it does get complicated with patents, but I do know some folks who change their names on like patents, for example, or on books. Again, nothing about it is easy, but I think as trans people, we all know nothing about changing a name will ever be the easy road.
No, I just had the experience of having to renew my driver's license, which I had not done since I had initially changed my name legally, right? I don't know. Anyway, the punchline of this whole joke is I show up at the DMV with my binder full of all of the legal proof that I am who I say I am, that there's just a piece of this that is obnoxious, and I wish there was a better way to do it. I do want to make note for anyone who is not aware, it is currently possible to get a United States passport with an X gender marker, which is something that I will be doing because Texas does not yet offer that as a gender marker. So I just want to throw that out there. Anyone else have experience with this whole weird change of names and brand? And I mean, I'm assuming there's some search engine optimization stuff that goes into that, Liam, that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it largely depends on how big your personal brand is, right? Let's say like contact your fellow SEO queer. I think there's about enough of us out there, so our realtors. But it's largely just going to depend on how much of a property you have out there. Like, so I had a business beforehand with my name and everything out there. I'd say for someone who doesn't have that kind of personal brand, you know, just transitioning as you move through different jobs in careers. What I have found helpful is talking to the references and the people that I have been, tight with projects on, to make sure that they understand, hey, this is me now, right? I know we worked together 3 years ago. Is that connection still solid, right? Are we still in a working relationship? And that way they can continue to vouch for your work beforehand. So that's, one thing that I've done is just outright, proactively, again, reached out to them, let them know where I'm at, making sure that they're okay with still vouching for the work. That's been really helpful. The other one is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is actually surprisingly very friendly. So, keep your LinkedIn up to date. I think in some cases you can also opt to also be known as previously by a certain name. So if someone is looking for you as a previous name, it's really helpful. Again, it's one of those situations where you run the risk of being outed if it's something that you don't want to. If you don't want to be outed, right, don't put it out there. But you can actually connect. If you change your name, it doesn't get rid of the certifications that you have in there. It doesn't get rid of the past references that you have, right? All of that stays live. So that's one way of preserving some of that history. I'd say work on beefing up your LinkedIn.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like from Jay's very vigorous head nodding, I believe LinkedIn also allows you to add your pronouns now as a piece of the top line, which is great. That's the other thing that I have appreciated. I've worked very closely with folks at LinkedIn in various ways, sometimes related to trans-related things, other times just not, but you show up as a non-binary person at a cisgender talk and guess what's going to happen? The thing that I've appreciated about that platform, as well as others, but that one mainly for professional reasons, is they give you the agency to make the determination of how you want to deal with your stuff. If there is anything else that anyone takes from this conversation today, it is that in whatever way that you can increase the amount of agency that can be given to trans and non-binary people in the professional workplace, as well as life in general, to just make their own decisions, things are better. Anna or Reed, before we wrap up for today.
Yeah, I haven't legally changed my name. That's something I'm currently just starting the process for. I will say also, I think one of the biggest challenges is picking a name, just like from the get-go. I'm sure that's something we've all struggled with, but yes, I feel like already the hardest part of the process. But like starting the name change process, I'm running into the issue of like applying for jobs. I work in academia, so the application process takes the course of months. But starting the application process when I know that in a few months I'll be changing my name, and then like just knowing that I'd start a different place with a completely different name than what I applied for, has thrown some, or it's been something I've been thinking about. But like Jay said, having to not ever hear your other name called again, or you're like, I don't know, having to never be called by that name again, I think weighs out everything. I will say as a librarian with cataloging knowledge, you can change names for books, and you can connect books with like you can put as many authors as you need to in whatever notes to connect all of your books, so they'll come up on one cohesive search. That's something I explicitly asked about in my cataloging class, because I am really interested in making sure that like queer and trans stories obviously are accessible and stuff, and I was curious about how trans authors deal with this from a cataloging perspective. So it is possible. You just need to find the librarian to do it, but they can and should do it for you.
So
this is why Reed is the librarian and archivist at OutYouth, in addition to their day job.
So question, do you have to find a librarian at every location, or is it like a single librarian that's able to like update this in like a global database of books?
I figured we were just going to call the Librarian of Congress.
I mean, essentially, no. No, it's essentially, so all of the records, or like most of the records across libraries are in this large database called WorldCat, which is just World Catalog. And I think you have to be, I want to say that this is through the Library of Congress, but I'm not actually sure, because I feel like WorldCat might go beyond, and I think that I'm incorrect in that. But records are editable through like various stages. So like you should be able to work with your local librarian on like a library note and stuff. And then yeah, I'm all for though emailing the Library of Congress and being like, change my name, please. It's incorrect now. You need to fix this.
You guys are always so consistent and accurate on everything. Why is this wrong? The other thing, this feels very random to throw in, but I am very grateful for this happy accident as an adult. When I was in college, I was given the nickname, the Lone Star Diva, and it has been my personal brand since then. And it is the thing that Liam and I talk about often, that no matter how many times I change my name, the beauty of being the Lone Star Diva and having the LoneStarDiva.com is that I can change my name however many times I want. I can't put the Lone Star Diva on a library book. I mean, I could. But there is some beauty in creating a brand for yourself that is a name that is nameless. That I don't know how others can replicate that, but I am very grateful for that happy little accident early on in my life.
So like whatever you do change your email address from whatever you had when you were in middle school, teenager. Like those embarrassing like Fairy Twinkledink number 6530 or something. It's a good anonymous one, right? But it's maybe something a little bit more grown up. I have a terrible story about my middle name, my middle school email address. And maybe someday I'll share it at a different time. But anyway, yeah.
Well, we are going to have to wrap it up there. I am due over in Teen Drop-In. Thank you all for joining us today. There's a lot of wonderful information. If you have any follow-up questions, please do get in touch with us at OutYouth by emailing hello@outyouth.org. We can send those questions along to any of our panelists if you would like to dig deeper. And a reminder that we have Q+ EDU sessions coming up. Oh, Frederick's here. I will let Frederick do the pitch for everything else that's coming up, because they know the schedule better than I do.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful panel. We were super grateful to have you. And for anyone in the audience, we would love for you to join us for the rest of our sessions this week. Tomorrow, we have a session on using the media for LGBTQ+ equality, featuring high school students out of Texas, as well as a member of the ACLU of Texas. And then on Thursday, one of our presenters from last year is returning for a conversation on navigating power differentials in romantic relationships. So keep an eye on q+edu.org for updates on the rest of the schedule for the rest of the month. We go through August 27th. We've got lots of great stuff coming up. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you soon.
Okay, bye everybody.